much, Missy. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Good. Well, welcome to Exploring Entrepreneurship. It's always a pleasure of mine to get to share about entrepreneurship, something that I'm very excited about and enjoy talking about and helping entrepreneurs. Always like to start with a little agenda. So just a list of things that we're going to try to accomplish tonight. Talk a little bit about entrepreneurship in our economy, timing, some entrepreneurial traits, starting point, common questions, and then I am going to ask you if you'll take advantage of this time to think about what you might want to do. So I've got a little bit of time for next steps, and then we'll have some time for questions. I am going to try to make sure that I get through this material in a reasonable time frame and that we leave time for questions at the end. So I don't want you to forget your questions. So as you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but we'll hold those until the end and then come back around and talk about them once we've covered all the other material. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. I love to answer questions from entrepreneurs and people who are thinking about entrepreneurship. So just a little bit about me. As Missy said, I'm Steve Bob. I work for the College of Business and run a program called the Entrepreneurial Support Program. And I've been at UIC now for over 7 years. And I've been helping entrepreneurs start, scale, and succeed in business for over 20 years. It's a lot of fun to talk to entrepreneurs in all types of businesses and help them think through some of the challenges and strategy questions that they need to address. And the Entrepreneur Support Program, now we're starting, I believe we've finished our 4th year. I have to check the calendar, but I think we've finished our 4th year. So we're starting our 5th year of service. We help entrepreneurs on campus, and I also do work with people off campus. So I'd be more than happy to sit down, and at the end of the evening, there'll be a link to a workshop series that I'm doing and also my email address. So I'd be happy. I always like to know who is in my audience. So I have a couple poll questions. Missy, can you bring those up?
Sure.
Hopefully on your screen, you'll get a couple of poll questions in a second. If not, I need to do that. You should have the poll questions in front of you. So these are 2 simple questions, but just, are you currently a small business owner? Are you generating revenue if you have a business? And then the second question is if you work for a small business, and I'm going to use my definition for this question of 20 employees or less. And, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but this just gives me a little bit of information about who my audience is. So if you can answer that real quick, that would help me. And then at the same time, what I'd like to ask is in the chat, if you want to write down what type of business or industry you're interested in. And if you're not sure, that's fine. You can either say you're not sure or not put anything, but it just helps me get a sense of who's here to see what the different opportunities are and the different interests are. So again, if you can answer those 2 poll questions and submit those, and then in the chat, someone put in there a couple of answers here, consulting and retail. It would be helpful if you wouldn't mind saying like what type of consulting and what type of retail. It's just interesting there. I see somebody say AI and ML, data science based. That's awesome. Any other ideas out there?
Steve, I think that maybe, can you try sharing the polls on your other device?
Yeah, okay. I will do that. Did it just pop up now where you can enter the information?
Yep.
Okay.
It's looking good. Thank you.
Sorry about that. There's always fun technology learning, and this is one of those things that we're learning a little bit about. But I see some answers coming in, so I'll give it just another 10 seconds, and then I will end the poll and share the results. So, and I see some other things: home health agency, crypto industry, game financing, entertainment company, e-commerce retail, maybe data analyst, business consulting. Thank you very much. So it's someone saying that we need to post a second question. Normally on my screen, when there's 2 questions, if you answer the first one, then the second one pops up. So I don't know. Okay, you know what? It's saying 1 question. So I'm going to end this poll. go ahead and share the results. So we have 19% of the attendees are currently generating revenue in a small business, and 81% are not. That's helpful. And let me see if I can find the other question. I'm going to try one more thing. Yeah. Missy, can you see if you can share the second question? And if not, we'll go on. There it is on my screen. Okay. Now I shared the second question there. Have you worked for, or are you currently working for a small business with 20 or less employees, or approximately 20? So if you can answer those. Is it showing? Okay, well, maybe. Okay. Nope.
Yeah, it seems for some reason that second question does not seem to want to show.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll just move on. But so a couple people have said no, so I'm assuming that that's related to not working for small business. Okay, well, that's okay, we'll go ahead. So a broad mix of people. Someone said graphic art, graphic designing, app management, a couple of other things. Let me see.
Yeah, I think there was a
Supply.
real estate too. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, real estate, cool. Evaluation research, strategic planning, supply chain consulting, design. So lots of different things. Someone said family. I assume that's family business. So a number of different ideas. And one of the reasons why I think that I can help people is that no matter what type of business, often the fundamentals of business are very much the same. The way you execute them changes, and the actual tactics that you might use are a little different, but the fundamentals of business I have found are pretty consistent between all businesses. And so I have helped all kinds of different businesses. And even when someone comes to me and says, hey, this is an idea, have you ever heard about it before? I've probably heard about it, but I might not have talked much about it. But I'm pretty confident that the business fundamentals will be able to be applicable. So a little bit about just our economy and the importance of small business. Often if you pay attention to the media, there's comments about how important it is. Well, here are some numbers to kind of give us a sense of where things are at. There are, depending on the statistics, somewhere around 30 million businesses in the United States. It's the current number approximately. That does change a little bit, and certainly the pandemic has made some changes. There are more people starting business, especially last year, than the past couple of years. About 5.6 million of those businesses are recorded as having employees. 89 or almost 90% of those have less than 20 employees. So we often hear about the big businesses. I know that often there's a lot of news about some big company moving their headquarters to Chicago or something. But, you know, approximately 90% of the businesses in this country that have employees have less than 20. And then there are about 25 million businesses that have no employees, that are people who have some kind of a side gig, some kind of a business on the side, whatever they call it, where they're reporting business income on their taxes, but they don't have any employees. So there are a lot of small business owners out there. It's a very common thing. Now, the Small Business Administration uses a definition of what they call for small is 500 or less employees. I've always thought that was a little weird, but you know, I don't make that rule. But it's just interesting. I think that you should be aware that, you know, a pretty good sized number of employee business can still get assistance from programs run by the Small Business Administration. And then another statistic, and I know this is a little bit old, but I think it's still pretty relevant, is that between 1993 and 2016, 61, almost 62% of all new jobs were created in small businesses. And so small businesses really are the job creation center of our economy. And Certainly the pandemic has changed a few things, but I don't think that this statistic has changed significantly since that. Our country really does run with small businesses. Small businesses drive innovation and exports. There are lots of creative ideas that come up, and certainly big companies are involved in both of these, but small companies are also super involved in creating these innovative economy innovations, new ideas, new ways to do things, and also focusing on exports. And I would certainly encourage that as you think about your small business, I do think you want to start locally. But once you're growing your business, I encourage you to think about the international market as well. And there are all kinds of businesses that export, and you could be one of them. What the studies tend to show is that people who also export have a more stable business, in that sometimes the economic cycles that we see in the economy don't affect overseas countries in the same way. So if we're starting to have a downturn, maybe they're still strong, and then as we recover, maybe they're a little bit weaker, but that cycle can be beneficial. People sometimes say, well, small businesses are risky. Is it going to make it? That is true, and thinking through that is why it's super important to make wise decisions and to plan and think about it. The statistics suggest that about half of businesses that get started survive 5 years or longer, and about 1/3 survive 10 or more years. And it's important to also understand that not every business that closes is a failure. Sometimes people get really good opportunities to make a pivot that doesn't involve a small business, but they go on to work in a different way. Maybe they were only looking at it as a bridge to a certain amount of time. Maybe they moved and it was impossible to track them down. So not every closed business is a failure. So timing. So sometimes people say, well, when is the right time to start a business? Is this a good time? Is it too risky? Is it the best time? In my experience, I would suggest that there really isn't a perfect time for you to start a business. There are certainly things that you need to be aware of. I wouldn't encourage someone to start a retail business in January or even a restaurant in January. But in general, I don't think that there's going to be a perfect time. I think we need to make do with the resources we have that are available and start when the timing is right. And so do think about that, but don't get so obsessed over it that you don't move ahead when the timing is right. Some entrepreneurial traits. Over the years, I've seen a lot of information that says there are no specific characteristics or entrepreneurial traits that everybody must have. But there are some things that are more common, and these are some things that I would encourage you to think about as you think about if entrepreneurship is right for you, because these are things that I see as important and that I think will come into play and that will be important. The risk-reward confidence issue. Everybody looks at risk in a different way. Everybody has different situations in their family life and their personal life that have a different impact on how they see risk and how they see reward. And entrepreneurs have to feel confident making decisions and being comfortable making those decisions when sometimes there's less information than they might like. But I do think that you'll have to decide what is your level of comfort and know that people around you might not agree with that. And that's something that you have to be confident that you've made the right decision for yourself and that you're confident that you can move forward. A number of years ago, I saw that there was a study that said that in entrepreneurs' minds, when they ask entrepreneurs if this was a risky decision, most of them say, no, it was a perfectly wise decision based on the information I knew. And so being confident in those decisions is very important. Very much related to that, perseverance. Entrepreneurship is not easy, and it is a long, slow process. I have talked to so many entrepreneurs who the timing that they planned for doesn't work out the way they expected. In fact, I remember being in a networking event way back before COVID came along, and I met an entrepreneur and I said, by the way, how much time and how much money did you think it was going to take to get started versus how much time and how much money did you actually do. And as I remember, his comments were that it took him twice as much money and 3 times as long to get where he was at that point. And it's not unusual. Things come up, things get in the way, and you have to push through them. So being able to persevere is an important trait. Being comfortable with being independent is another trait that I think you'll want to think about. Entrepreneurship has its positive sides. One of the negatives is doing things on your own and often being the sole one who takes the time and the energy to move through these things. And so I would say that if you really don't like to work alone, that would be something you want to think about. And you want to learn how you work comfortably alone and how you can use that to generate energy and persistence to move through. And then being aware of who you are and what's important to you and how you function, I think is another characteristic and trait that you need to be looking at and thinking about. There's a lot of challenges that entrepreneurs face. And so being understanding of yourself and what makes you most productive. Say one of the things that I hear people talk about around time management is what is the best time of the day for you to get things done? How do you make decisions? How do you do that in a way that makes you comfortable with those? Understanding those things about yourself, I think, will be really helpful. A couple more entrepreneurial traits. I have really noticed and seen that sales is something that every entrepreneur has to do. And I often meet people who are like, well, I don't really like to do sales. I'm not sure that I really want to be a salesperson. And what I would say is you have to overcome that and be confident that you're going to be your best salesperson. Certainly, many businesses hire sales teams and have people who help them with the sales process. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I do think that especially founders of small companies, they have to be their chief salespeople, and they can delegate certain parts of that. But if they aren't going to be, there's just no one's going to sell like you will. And you've got to be comfortable with that passion. That's a skill you can learn, but I think it's super important. And often people who don't want to do sales can be in a real challenge. You're going to have to sell to yourself, to convince yourself, to those close people in your close circle, your significant others, your family members. You're going to have to sell to customers. And then if you need outside investment, funders and investors. So these are all people that you're going to have to be able to effectively communicate with them what you're offering and why they should purchase from you. Entrepreneurs need outside support and resources. And so thinking about how you're going to address that, how you're going to make sure that you have the resources you need and building that network around you is also important. I would encourage you to start thinking about that as soon as possible and just getting to know what those resources are and how to use those in a way to help you grow your business. And I will tell you, Chicago is a great city to start a business. There really are a lot of resources. And that's one of the things that makes it exciting for me because when I don't have a good answer for someone, I can help them identify resources in the community that can help them through that. Your family will need to support you. I know that sometimes that's a challenge, and I would encourage you to spend some time thinking about that and talking. But entrepreneurs who don't have family support often struggle. Not to say that you can't do it without family support, but it's something that I would certainly encourage you to understand. And then what does that mean specifically for your responsibilities in your family? If you have children, if you have elder adults, what do you need to do to make sure that you can provide for them while you're also providing for your business? Another thing that I see that makes a big difference is financial and insurance stability. And I know, again, that's going to be different for each person, but really thinking through that, especially back to my comment that it's going to take twice as much money. The reality is that it's really helpful when you have some resources that you can fall back on. And certainly health insurance can also be a challenge in thinking through that. Those are important things. And then last thing I would say about entrepreneurial traits in this part of the presentation is that entrepreneurship is a lifestyle, but it also needs to be a lifestyle of being wise and understanding where your focus is. And I've rarely seen a loan officer so upset and so disappointed when I was working with somebody who had borrowed money, and all of a sudden the entrepreneur showed up with basically a new, very expensive car. The money was for the business, not for them to personally buy a new car. And there were a lot of disappointed people, and I don't think that business owner, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I don't think that that was a positive sign of what was going to happen in the future. So things to think about in terms of some entrepreneurial traits. So what's a good starting point for a business and for an entrepreneurial journey? Well, as you're starting to think through this process, I think that you need to think about putting together a written business plan. And I know that might sound a little scary, might sound like a lot of work, but I have seen time and time again where I think that a business plan, a written business plan, is really one of the most important things that any business owner has. And I really like this quote from President and General Eisenhower. He said, and the context was a little different, but I think it's still very relevant. And I think if you read the entire quote, it still makes sense. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. I see when I work with people who are putting together plans, a change in their way of thinking about things. And it's very hard to fully explain it, to really be able to explain exactly what changes, but there's something about someone's ability to think through and to have a process and a plan for what they're doing when they take the time to write things down, to really think about the different things that are part of the business. Planning helps you to be proactive and not reactive. And it gives you a process, and it forces you to think about some common things that many other business owners have thought about and faced. And so one of my favorite tools that I encourage people to use is called the growth wheel, and it has 20 main areas. It's a long list. It might sound like, boy, that's a lot of things to think about, but those are things that probably you will have to address. In fact, in most cases, I found that that's a relative important list of things that need to be addressed. As you plan, you can surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, and that's another thing that I think you should be always thinking about. And it will help you think about those things that you don't know about, that you might not have thought of. You don't know what you don't know, and sometimes what you don't know can bite you. And so really taking the time to think through things, I think, is worth it. So what should be in your written business plan? Well, to me, your written business plan really can be defined in a couple of short statements. The actual plan won't be short, but it's a document that shows how the business is going to generate profit, and really focus on three main areas: marketing, operations, and finance. And I like to think about, real briefly, marketing is how you're going to get customers, or how the business is going to get customers. Operations is how you make those happy customers. You want customers who feel that they got what they wanted, and in fact are willing to come back and do it again. And then the financial section is how everybody walks away compensated appropriately. And the language of business is often spoken about in the financial terms. And so as a business owner, you need to have a basic understanding of the financial side of it, and be able to talk that language in a way to show others that you understand it and that it's wise for them to be part of your team. I have a document that if you're interested in, and if we can add the link to the chat, if you would like to start to look at a checklist, this is something that you might have heard about, a workshop series that I present called the Venture Series. And this startup checklist is something that I cover during the first section. I'll actually cover this next Wednesday night. And so you can get your hands on a copy of this now. And if that's helpful to you, and then if you'd like to hear more comments about it, learn more about it, then at the end of this presentation, I'll share some information about how to sign up for the workshop series. But I've put together this list of about, I think there are 11 items that I would encourage you to think about. And in the checklist, I've also provided some resources where you can find more information on these things. So what are some common questions that I get about entrepreneurship? The first one I would say is, do I really need a written plan? How important is having a plan in writing? Well, I will tell you, in working with hundreds, probably thousands of entrepreneurs over 20 years, I know that there's nothing that will guarantee success. But I do believe that people who have a written plan have a more likely chance of succeeding than those who try to wing it. And so I don't want you to put together the plan saying this is what's going to make me successful, but I certainly do think that it's the most important tool you can have. People often ask, how much money do I need to start a business? Well, one of the things that I hope you will do as you put together your plan is actually figure out exactly how much money you need. Now, there are some statistics out there that I like to share with people. And so there is a magazine called Inc. magazine, and every year they do a survey of the 5,000 fastest growing CEOs or 5,000 fastest growing companies. And a couple of years ago, they asked the CEOs of those companies, how much money did they need to use to start their business? And I was a little shocked when I heard this. 42% said that they spent under $5,000 to get started. And then the next band was up to 25,000. And so a total of 63% of business owners in that group said they had started with less than $25,000. So that hopefully gives you a sense, but you need to be able to define exactly what you need for your business. And certainly I've worked with lots of people who also need a lot more. So it's a matter of you putting together your estimates and your calculations and then understanding. And so then the next thing is, well, where do I get the money? How do I do this? Well, the statistics show, and these are again a couple years old, but I think that they're still relevant, that 64% of small businesses started with personal and family savings. 18% got loans from banks. I would have thought that number was a little higher, but bank loans are difficult to get, but they do sometimes happen. And then another 10% use personal credit cards. Now, I will tell you, I'm not a real big fan of using personal credit cards, but I also understand why small business owners do that. And so that's a pretty large chunk of how small business owners got started. 64% personal and family, 18% loans, and 10% credit cards. So you might have heard about angels or venture capitalists. Do they fund small businesses? Well, they do fund small businesses, but the statistics actually suggest that it's a very, very small percent. So the numbers I have, and I know again these are a little bit old, but I really don't think that they're out of whack. 0.91, so 0.91, less than 1% of businesses get money from angels, and the venture capital number is even more staggering. It's 0.05 get money from venture capitalists. So there is a place for angels and venture capitalists. I would say that in many ways, many of the entrepreneurs that I've talked to over the years, it's probably not really a good fit. So definitely I would encourage you to be aware of it and understand what your options are. And during the third week of the Venture series, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But it is a challenge to work with venture capitalists and angels. And so other sources of money are much more common. And then what are some other resources? Well, just two resources that I'll present here and very quickly just mention about them is one, the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov. They have a platform, they've expanded to some different things, and they call it their learning platform. And actually inside of that, if you go to their website, there is what's called the Learning Center. And there are various resources there that you can learn more about small business. And then Chicago has, through a public-private partnership, there's an organization in Chicago called Shy Biz Hub. There are various resources there. And then there's the Venture series, which I'll mention a little bit. So there are lots of resources in Chicago. And one of the things about putting together your plan is to identify those resources and get a sense of where those resources are, what's appropriate for you, what they offer that you can take advantage of. What I'd like to do is I will answer some questions, but I'd like to take about 3 minutes and encourage you to think about what you've heard and think about what your next steps are. I always want to provide actionable ideas. And so if there's something I have said that you want to know more about, I see we've got some great questions and we'll get to those after a couple of minutes of time for you to write something down. But I really believe that writing down your goals, your steps is a super important process. And I also believe that an important part of holding yourself accountable on that is to actually not just write down what you want to do, but write down dates of when you're going to try to accomplish that. And so use your phone, take some notes, write some paper, get some paper and write it down on paper. But what are the 3 things you're going to do based on what you've heard tonight from me? A little quote here to inspire you as you think about this. This is from a gentleman from Australia who's a well-known business consultant. The simple act of writing down a goal and making a written plan for its accomplishment moves you into the top 3% of people. So let me give you a couple minutes to write things down and we'll go over some questions. So hopefully you've written down some goals and now we'll start to take some questions. So why don't we go ahead and start by looking at the questions that have come in the chat. I've been able to skim over those a little bit. So I'll go ahead and start reading a couple of them off. And if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat here. So there was a question early on. What are the challenges for international students to start their businesses? Any tips? So this is a question that I occasionally get. And unfortunately, this becomes a very complicated issue. I am not a lawyer and can't provide legal advice. What I would suggest is that the first thing is you really need to have a conversation with somebody who understands the type of immigration status you have here in the United States and address the issues that are required by that. My understanding from what I've heard, and again, this is a very unprofessional response, is that my understanding is that there's nothing that restricts someone who doesn't have permanent status here to start a business. It's just that if they want to take the profits that they make from the business outside of the United States, then that becomes more of a challenge. But I know that there are experts out there who can help you understand what your immigration status means and what would be involved in that. I would encourage you, the fundamentals of business still apply. And so you have to have something that people want to pay for. You have to have a process for how you're going to make sure that you deliver what they're looking for. And you have to have a plan for how you're going to track that financially. So those parts, the basic parts of the business plan, are still going to be relevant. It's just understanding any legal implications. I can tell you that what I am pretty sure of is if you file a business with the Illinois Secretary of State, on that form, they don't ask anything about the immigration status of the owners of that business. So And certainly I'm happy to chat a little bit more, but that really is a question you'll need to talk to a lawyer about. Questions about books and podcasts about small business. There are lots of resources out there. I would say that probably if you did a internet search of books and podcasts on entrepreneurial topic, you'd get a lot of them. And I think that one of the things about books and podcasts is that that tends to be based on what is of interest to you and authors and speakers who resonate well with you. So I can't think of any right now. I do have a list of some books that I think are valuable. A couple of years ago, I found on the internet someone who had, I think, claimed that they had talked to some MBA programs in different universities and compiled a list of books that were a match between different well-known schools. And so I do have a list. In terms of podcasts, I'm not a big podcast listener, but I know that there are some out there, and would encourage you to start doing that. Also, there are going to be industry specific things, both some about the books and some about podcasts that might be more of interest. And there are people who have been very successful both writing books and starting podcasts. So maybe that's also a business idea that you could start to think about. Where can you identify a good consultant to help you start your business? Well, I am always happy to sit down and talk. One of the things I would say is that this is probably a process of you building a relationship with a number of different people and getting a sense of the different skills and resources that they have available. I see this question in the context of a mentor, of a advisor, and my belief is that you probably aren't going to have just one. You're probably going to have a group of different consultants, different advisors who give you advice. And different people are going to have different life experiences, are going to have different backgrounds, and bring their perspective on the decision to you. And so I would encourage you to connect with different people and ask them, find out what they're able to give you in terms of both knowledge and their background and in terms of time. You might find someone who is very busy, who can only meet with you once a quarter. Still might be worth that time and worth you investing in that. There might be other people who you can meet with more often based on what you need. And so I would certainly check on different people. Two advisors that I would certainly encourage every business, really three advisors that I think every business owner needs to have. Probably first and probably most important is a great accountant. And I would encourage you to ask other business owners, especially people who are in your industry, because accounting can be very specialized. And so that would be the first consultant that I think you want to have on your team. A second one is a lawyer. Now, a lawyer and accountant have very different perspective on things, and you might find that they might disagree. Part of the challenge of being a business owner is you get to figure out which direction you want to go with that. But I think that having a lawyer, and again, a lawyer who understands your industry is important. There are a lot of industries out there, and there might even be times when you need a lawyer who has a specific expertise. So, you know, a lawyer who helps you with HR issues probably wouldn't know a lot about patents or intellectual property. Would probably know the basics, but maybe not, you know, helping you really dig into what's really important for you. So, and then the third consultant that I think is really important is that you really build a strong relationship with your insurance broker. And we as a society need insurance for a lot of different reasons. And so building a good relationship with an insurance agent who can help you and who will be able to help you make wise decisions about how to appropriately use insurance. Next question, DACA and undocumented specifically to consider. As I said before, you probably will have to talk to a lawyer about the specifics about any issues. Again, I don't believe that when you register your business, you will have to report that. You should pay taxes, whether you're documented or undocumented. A lot of people have been disappointed about some of the programs that have been to assist entrepreneurs through the COVID crisis, through the pandemic, and a number of consultants have expressed frustration at how many business owners like, I want to get a grant. Do you have your taxes? Well, I've never filed taxes. So you really need to make sure that you are doing everything you can to be legal as possible, and especially paying those taxes. Scrolling down here. Asks about advice on going into a field that's viewed as controversial by the US government and states and is still very new today. I can just guess about that. Two things that I might hear about that might be questionable on this are cannabis and marijuana, and also some of the changes in the gambling laws and stuff. I'm sure that there are some others out there. I will tell you that because the university gets so much funding from the federal government, I have been asked not to work with people who want to start cannabis businesses. I'm very sorry that that's what I was told. I would certainly be glad to talk to you about very broad general conversations, but if you ask me specifics about cannabis, I'm going to have to say I can't help with that. But I do sometimes help people who don't tell me what they're doing. There is a time when that can be a little bit of a challenge as a consultant, but I certainly do what I can. There are some programs in the state for people who want to get into the cannabis business, and I certainly would be glad to share those with you if you want to reach out to me about that. The other thing I mentioned maybe is around gambling and sports betting. One of the issues there is that it really is a regulated environment, and having the resources to get the appropriate legal help to do that is super important, and probably you want to have someone who you can consult who really understands that because of those challenges. Certainly there are different industries that people have shied away from. And sometimes I know when I see like grant opportunities from the city, especially related to some of the recovery grants for small businesses, there have been some comments about certain business types that are not allowed. The reality though is still in most cases, the main business concepts are still relevant. And so you still have to have a way to get customers, a plan for how to make those customers happy, and a plan for keeping track of it financially. And I know that on the cannabis issues, there continues to be an effort to try to make that a more viable way to do business. We'll see what happens as we continue through that path. Do you need to secure permits, licenses, and purchase insurance if you start a business using social media or an online business? So I think what I'll say in a gentle way is that I think everybody needs to do their research into what is appropriate for their line of business. In my interpretation of the rules for home-based businesses in Chicago, I am under the impression that the rules and laws are pretty comprehensive, that anybody who is running a business out of their house must have a permit to do business there. Now, certainly it becomes a lot more complex if you have employees or if you have inventory. And if you're going to have a location where customers or employees come on a regular basis, I think that it's much more of an issue that you need to be aware of. If you and a couple of other people are starting a business and you really are completely online and you're just sitting working on your computer all day, I don't know if that's something you'll have to decide what you think is the appropriate thing, but that I can see as being more of a gray area. But again, if you have employees, if you have inventory, one person said, and I'm sure I'm going to say this a little bit wrong, but basically if you can smell it, if you can feel it, if you can hear it. So if you're pounding on, equipment all day, if it's making noise, if there's, smells coming out of your place, you definitely are at risk of being in trouble for not having the right permits and licenses. This is one of those areas that is complicated and is one where you just have to keep asking lots and lots of questions. And Unfortunately, also, there are different levels of government that are going to have licenses and permits. So many licenses in Chicago are handled by what is called Business Affairs and Consumer Protections. And if you do an internet search for Chicago BACP, Business Affairs and Consumer Protections, that is the agency that handles those issues in the city. But there are certain types of issues that are regulated by the state. Many of those are through the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, but not exclusively. And then there are some businesses that are regulated at the federal level, although there's very few of those. Tends to be industries that have a higher risk of someone getting hurt or of being damaged or something of that nature. But you just have to ask those questions. It's also a thing where I think, and one of my favorite comments is, and this isn't a cop-out, it's what is your competition doing, is looking at what types of licenses and permits they have. If they have them, there's probably a reason why they do, and it's probably a reason why you will need to consider that as well. So definitely ask questions about that. Insurance often comes up when people have inventory or also when people are renting space. So it's very common that if you're going to rent, whether it's an office or a storefront, your rental lease agreement will state that you have some specific types of insurance. Often businesses try to avoid it until that point, not necessarily a wise idea, but that is one of the places where then you get forced to have insurance. So let me see, I didn't scroll down fast enough here. Just to go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, the next question I have, somebody wants information about HR and getting like HR expertise. That's something it sounds like somebody is looking for assistance with.
So HR is one of those issues where there are various resources out there that you can find on the internet, and I can certainly point to you some of those resources that have more information, but often this is something where you'll need to have conversations with your lawyer. In fact, I work very extensively with an entrepreneur who's starting a restaurant, and he often, I would say at least twice a month in conversations with him, he'll be like, oh yeah, I ran that by my lawyer. I'm going to run that one by my lawyer. There are just some really tricky issues that having comments by a lawyer is really helpful. There are some basic practices that I can help you with. There are some really basic things about HR, but then things start to get more complicated. So today, this client and I, he had an employee who traveled internationally, and he wanted to know what he could demand of the employee in terms of COVID testing coming back into the country. Little questions like that, certainly when I met this gentleman 4 years ago and started talking about how to open a restaurant, we would have never thought about having to ask those questions. But today that's a pretty relevant question because it's such a big issue. And so, and the law does change. I was on a workshop the other day about employment issues and just reminded that there are always changes that you need to be aware of. So there are, for companies that are growing, there are some newer companies that specialize in helping startup companies with HR related issues. And I think there's some real value in that. And then having a good relationship with that lawyer to make sure that you're doing things wisely. HR is one of those challenges. And I've said a number of times recently, my restaurant client, I can guarantee you that, again, when we met 4 years ago, he never thought that he'd have so many HR questions when he wanted to sell food. But HR is a big issue. You can't do it all yourself. At some point, you'll need to hire people, and you'll need to have the resources to help you get through that appropriately. Another question here about a student on an F1 visa. You'll have to find a lawyer who can help you understand what the rules are for someone who has an F1 visa. So I probably went over this very fast. But I do have a workshop series called the Venture Series. It's 4 weeks starting every Wednesday in the month of February. And so on the screen and in the chat, I know that Missy has put the link where you can go to register. And if you want to learn more about it, there's a little bit more description there. Students and staff can register for free. There's normally a charge, but students and staff can register. The code is VS4UIC. And I'd certainly be glad to have you in that. We'll dig into a number of these things. The first workshop is about the different resources in Chicagoland. We go over the startup checklist that I mentioned earlier in one of the earlier slides, go over that in a little bit more detail, and just talk about some things that you want to think about as you start to think about the planning process. The second workshop is called Venture Viability. We have 4 main topics that night: customers, products, competition, and profit. And just give some insight into thinking about those 4 specific areas. And I do provide some handouts to work on and some time to fill some notes in on those. Certainly, that's just gonna be a starting point. You're gonna have to do some more homework on that. But I want you to see that there's some resources there to start to think about those issues. And really, I would say that those are the foundational parts of putting together a business plan. And then the third week is called Venture Finance, and that's about different resources that entrepreneurs can use to fund their business. And what are some of the expectations of people on the other side of the table? What's an angel thinking about? What's a venture capitalist thinking about? What's a lending officer thinking about? And then what are the good and the bad of those different types of funding? And then the last workshop, we cover a little bit more about marketing, a little bit more about operations, and then talk about some legal issues and provide you some basic information about where to find the resources, especially around the licensing and regulation issues. And so I also meet with entrepreneurs one-on-one. And if you're interested in that, my email is there. I think Missy's put my email in the chat. Certainly she can forward my information to you, or you can reach out to me. I am on campus a couple of days a week, although at this time all my meetings are virtual. Hopefully at some point that will change, but I meet with people all the time to talk about all these different topics. And so thank you so much for coming. I know there are a couple more questions, so Missy, I don't know how long you want to go, but I'm happy to stick around and keep answering a couple questions if there are. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, there's a few more questions. So I'm okay with staying on. If people need to run, totally fine. I know it's been I'm sure you've had a busy day. Thank you again for joining us. This is put on by Career Services and Steve's Center for Entrepreneurial Support at UIC. We're so happy you're here. Again, a couple more questions. We'd love to get your feedback in the chat. And like Steve said, we hope maybe you can join him for his workshop series. I think you'll learn even more than we have gone over tonight. But if you need to leave, totally fine. Steve, so a question that I saw, somebody wanted to know about finding an attorney. And then also there was a question about like paying sales tax once you've hit that $600 threshold. It sounds like there's people want a little bit of support in learning about that.
Okay. Well, probably the easy one there is, what about finding an attorney? So whenever you want to find a resource to help you as a business owner, I suggest that you start by doing some internet searches and then talking to people who you know who are already in the field. So entrepreneurs, ideally, I would suggest that you talk to entrepreneurs who are in the same industry as you. But if you don't know people who are doing that, or you don't have good connections, talk to people who are already in the industry to see who they have found helpful and who has been helpful to work with them. Both attorneys and accountants and insurance folks all have different specialties. And so while I think that most people who are trained in those areas, and I would certainly check if they have the requisite designations or licensing, while people who have those are going to be probably competent in a broad sense, there are always going to be nuances. And so I always think it's worth, like if I mentioned a restaurant, I think it's worth, if you're going to do a restaurant, that you talk to an attorney who understands and has some experience in restaurants, and an accountant who's worked with other restaurant clients. It's always an encouragement to me. My restaurant client has a great accountant, but I always feel even extra better about when they respond and they're like, well, our other clients are doing it this way, because different industries do have their unique things. In terms of sales tax issues, that's one that gets a little complicated, and I definitely think that talking to an accountant would be really helpful. The 600 threshold, technically, I don't believe that there's a threshold of when you need to start paying taxes. It's a threshold of when another business or individual is required to provide or be provided a form. But my understanding is that, as the law states, there is no threshold per se. Sales tax is an issue typically when you are the last business selling a product to an end user. So if you were, let's say that you were printing custom t-shirts and that you were then selling them to a retailer, at that point, I believe that you would not be involved with sales tax. It's the retailer, the person selling those t-shirts to the consumer, who handles the sales tax. But there are some nuances there. I believe that in Illinois, the candy world is very unique, that there are some nuances, that when the sales tax rules were written, there were some nuances about what's considered different types of candy. And I know that also on international trade, this can kind of get into an interesting question, whether batteries included in the product, or I know there was a big dispute that I thought was kind of interesting, although totally irrelevant, about what a figurine, whether it was a mutant or a it was a very interesting argument that Mattel got into with the IRS about when they should have to pay taxes on what was the definition of that, but I am digressing. I would certainly be glad to have a conversation with you and see if I can give you some more insight, but probably I would encourage you that it's worth reaching out to an accountant. I do have a list of accountants that I share with people. It's just a list of people who I've connected with over the years. I don't like to recommend people because there really are nuances. And in terms of lawyers, I do have a couple of ideas on that topic as well. But again, you'll need to determine who exactly you want to use. In terms of, certainly in terms of issues with the law, remember that UIC does have the UIC Law School, and they do have some clinics where they assist small businesses. And so you can also check with them. There are a number of other programs like that in Chicago. I have some information about that. And you might want to see if you could see if there are any students or professors in the accounting program in the College of Business who might be willing to provide some advice. Both those organizations also have state associations where you can look up a finder, or look up you can enter some information and they'll give you some recommendations. So other questions?
Okay, so I have 3 more, and then I think we'll probably call it a night.
Okay.
So
Cool.
there's a question about how you feel about a business like Robinhood or Citadel. That could be a really long question, but maybe just some thoughts about that.
You know, I think the best thing is every business needs to have a focus of why it provides resources that other people can't get, and that's where they get them the best. So there are certainly people who see this as an ethical issue, and certainly I would encourage you to make a wise decision what's appropriate for you. I do believe that we need to be respectful of customers, employees, and investors in any business. And sometimes people have different thoughts on how to do that. But in terms of the pure business side of things, it does come back to, are there people willing to pay for it? And is it giving them a value that they feel is worth it? And is it generating return for the investors in that company? So I think that's all I'll say about that.
Wonderful. There's a question about a student that wants to, or maybe it's an alum who wants to start a t-shirt company. The person's trying to decide if they should print the t-shirts themselves or maybe have another company print them. Maybe they're looking for some thoughts about that.
Sure. One of the things that's come out of the pandemic is this whole issue of supply chain issues. And so in any business, you have to think about how you're going to make sure that you have the resources and you have what you want to sell. And so I think you have to decide how you find that balance and what's appropriate for you. You also have to decide what you have the investment to make. Do you have the investment to invest in the equipment you need to do the business? Or are you better off being in essence, a broker between one interested party and another supplier? And I think that would be true in just about any business. As business owners, we need to prioritize what are we best at and what can we do the most effective. And so, to me, this is the same as hiring someone to do maybe my social media activity or my marketing activities. Is that something you want to do? Do you want to be the person who prints them? Or do you want to just be someone who sells them and is a broker and a go-between? Both sides are going to have their good things and their bad things. And there are going to be times when, you'll probably second guess yourself. Part of making an entrepreneurial decision is making a decision and moving forward with it and knowing that it might change. One of the things that I see, especially with people writing a business plan, is, well, maybe I don't know, or what if I change my mind? My answer has always been, you use the best information you have at the time to make the best decision you can based on what you know today. Tomorrow, we might be hit with another pandemic. I certainly hope we don't. Tomorrow, a competitor might open the doors right next door and then you have to pivot. All kinds of things could happen. So you take the decision, the information you have, you make the best decisions based on where you're at today, and you move forward and know that will probably change.
Wow, that's great advice. This is the last question that I saw in the chat. So again, thank you for joining us. We're delighted that you all are here. So the question is, it looks like a student's looking for help with potentially like how to obtain a patent for a product or a business, like maybe like legal help and funding
Sure.
as well, but it sounds like mostly about patents.
So I'd like to broaden this question a little bit and use the word intellectual property. A patent is one of 4 types of intellectual property. And I believe that every business has intellectual property. The question is really, what do you need to do to protect that intellectual property? What is appropriate and what is the best thing to do at this time? And just like I said on the previous question, you're going to have to make some compromises and some decisions and some thinking about what you can do today. On the patent issue, my understanding and from working with people, I don't believe that you can get a patent for maybe you can do it for a little bit under $10,000, but realistically, I would say that most people who pay for a patent are spending somewhere in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. For a lot of people, that might not be appropriate. Now, for some businesses, that really is something you need to do. And that might be a decision that, well, I can't do that, so I can't do this business. Other people might say, you know what, I'd really like to do it, but I just don't have the resources today. I'm going to have to be wise about how I talk about it and understand the consequences. Other people might be able to find a way to get someone to help them with that. I've seen people who have bartered with their patent attorney. I've seen situations where that maybe was not the best idea. They maybe didn't get the best advice on that. So it's something that you really need to think about and ask a lot of questions. We do have a program, and at the risk of promoting another school, I will just say that Kent School of Law does have a patent clinic and is approved, or was, and I assume that they still are, by the U.S. Patent Office to be a provider to help people in Chicagoland. The patent office has tried to create a partnership with one organization in every state to make sure that there are resources there, because there have been plenty of people who have gone down this road in not the best way. But you definitely do need to think about it, and certainly I'd be glad to talk to you about that. And just another note, because we are on a university campus, if you're a graduate student and you have any intellectual property, the university needs to be notified about that and has a different set of rules for graduate students and faculty about that. So certainly be glad to talk to you more about that one-on-one, because that is a pretty complicated situation. But also for that, one of the places to start is Kent. And I will say one advantage of being a student in this area is that there are fees that are based on income. And so if you're a student and have low income, that can be helpful at this time for you to do that, and might be a reason why you want to consider that while you're still a student, and not after you graduate and start making more money. So I am happy to talk. So my email's there. Please feel free to reach out to me. And I'd love to see you in the workshops, and the registration information is there. Thank you, Missy.
Absolutely. So I'm impressed with people hung on. I know I'm sure you all had a long day and it's so cold outside. So we really thank you so much for joining us. This was informative. You learned lots of great things from what Steve had. I'm going to stop the recording.